Professor Barnes, can we start with you, please? Can you tell me about some of the benefits of medical cannabis, of just how transformative it can be?
Yes, certainly. I mean, cannabis has been around for about 5,000 years. In fact, it was the first medicine described and written down about in the ancient Chinese community. So we've known about it for a long time. It's not a new medicine. Some people say this is new, we don't know much about it. Of course we do, we know a lot about it. And what it does from a medical point of view, and I'm not at the moment talking about recreational or spiritual use, but from a medical point of view, it's really helpful for a lot of chronic conditions like pain. That's the most widely prescribed use, anxiety, and other neurological conditions, as we might talk about in a moment, particularly for childhood epilepsy. It can be life transforming. Not for everybody. It's not right for everybody. I'm not saying it is, but for many people, it's a remarkably useful addition to the doctor's panoply of potential treatment options.
Are there any downsides to its availability, Professor Barnes? Can it be abused? Or would you say that if there's any medical condition, then frankly, knock yourself out with medical cannabis?
Yeah, I think we need to clarify just for a moment that there's many, 147 to be exact, cannabinoids in the plant. Now, we all hear about THC. That's the one that's high in the plant that gets you high. That if you go to the street and buy it, it's high in THC. That's what the recreational street users want. The other main cannabinoid in the plant is called CBD. That's the one that has a lot of medical properties, as does THC. But the important point to remember is if you prescribe cannabis with CBD, it counteracts the high of THC. So the point of medical prescription is not to get high. And it's very rare for people to get high with a medical prescription. That's not the point, and it doesn't happen. And we should remember that.
It's really important you point that out. How exactly does medical cannabis work in the body? Why does it relieve many symptoms?
It interacts, all vertebrates, and obviously humans, we have what's called an endocannabinoid system. So we all have cannabis receptors in our brain. We're born with them. And we have natural cannabinoids produced in the brain, one called anandamide, and there's several of them. They interact with those receptors, and what they do is they balance the brain function out. It's called homeostasis. They smooth things out, if you like. So it helps anxiety, it helps pain, it helps the abnormal, if you like epilepsy. And that's a natural system. And the plant cannabis simply interacts with our own inbuilt endocannabinoid system. That's how it works. So it's a natural product that's enhancing our own system.
Are there any known side effects? Can you overdose?
Sure. Yeah, well, like any medicine, it's not right for everybody. And we know, for example, that street cannabis can make schizophrenia worse. It can induce psychosis. But we shouldn't confuse that with the medical cannabis for the reasons I've just said. CBD counteracts that high. And sure, it's not right for everybody. It increases the pulse rate, for example, and that's not right for people with heart conditions. So, like any medicine, there's people in the population who shouldn't take cannabis. And we should say, even if you can take it and it's right for you to take it, it doesn't work for everybody. So I'm not one of these people who push it as some sort of magic solution, cures everything, cures cancer. That's nonsense. But it's a really helpful thing for a lot of chronic, long-term conditions like pain, like anxiety, like epilepsy.
Matt Hughes, you are the co-founder and director of MedCan Support, a hub for education, research and advocacy around the use of cannabis for children. And your own son has been privately prescribed cannabis for his epilepsy. Can you tell me how important this application has been for his condition?
Extremely important. It's life-changing. He was having up to 120 seizures per day, and that was on 4 anti-epileptics. Since we've introduced medical cannabis, that's reduced down to 20 or less. So, it's not, as Mike says, it's not a cure-all, but it's transformed his life and ours as well as his parents.
And we know that 3 years ago, the law changed, Matt, making these particular medications, this medical cannabis, available to those who were in need for health reasons. So why has your son not been able to be prescribed cannabis?
It basically goes down to the NICE guidelines and the BPNA, which is the British Paediatric Neurology Association. So the two guidance together is preventing clinicians from prescribing cannabis, but also, clinicians in the UK have grown up with prohibition. They've seen cannabis as this harmful street drug, and they're not educated in the endocannabinoid system, which Mike has just spoken about. Nor are they educated in cannabis. So there's a huge amount of stigma still associated with cannabis. There's a misconception between, or misunderstanding between medical and recreational use. And the guidance is asking for more evidence, but we've got tons of evidence. There's, even in the UK, we now have 22 children to show 92% chance of cannabis being effective for epilepsy, which is huge, and an 85% reduction in seizures. So as anti-epileptics go, that's really good. So we've got the evidence. We just need NICE to be accepting of real-world evidence, of observational evidence, to be able to to allow clinicians to prescribe.
Now, Graham Wetton, the former police officer, is currently unavailable, but I'm delighted to welcome former police officer Mike Neville instead. Mike, thank you so much for stepping in at the last minute. Mike, it strikes me that a simple fix for this would be to legalise cannabis altogether, legalise marijuana.
Well, it's a big problem in the UK because the Misuse of Drugs Act refers to controlled drugs, but who controls them? It's certainly not the government or the police, it's the criminals. And I saw the impact of drug dealing, being in charge of the drug squad at Brixton and then as a DI and a DCI. And it's a complete mess. And we either do one thing or the other in this country. What we do at the moment is we try and do a halfway house. We either ruthlessly crush drugs, which I think will end in failure, or we legalise it and it's sold in a proper manner. And as the professor has said, this medicinal cannabis is all checked and the like. The danger comes from like very high quality cannabis like the skunk, which is very, very dangerous and sold on the streets. The whole thing would be better if it was controlled by the government and drugs were sold. And I think that people would be quite bored, really. I knew a Rasta guy who used to sell anodins as LSD, and middle-class white kids would buy them and go back again because they got the thrill from buying them from this dodgy drug dealer. So the whole thing is a farce. We need to look at this as a country. We copied American prohibition in the 60s, and as we know, it didn't work with alcohol, so why would it work with drugs? And if it's bringing medical relief, we need to ensure that it's properly tested and it goes through proper laboratories and it's available for everybody who needs it. But we can't carry on with this ridiculous halfway house of, we'll legalise cannabis, but not this one, and you can legalise possession, but not dealing. You've got to do all or none. And at the moment, we're in the middle.
And what do you think about that, Professor Mike Barnes? Do you think that it would simplify things, especially for the regulators, if marijuana was simply legal?
Well, it would simplify it for the regulators. My concern about that, and I think the recreational debate is a perfectly valid debate and one that we should have in the country. But what I'd like to see first is get the medical prescriptions sorted. Because the problem about legalising it, they've seen that in Canada and some of the US states where it's been totally legalised, the people who have struggled to get their prescription from their doctor, and in this country, we do struggle to get prescriptions from our doctors, they'll go to the recreational market, they'll buy something, and of course they're not guided medically. They don't know quite what to get, they don't know quite what dose to take, and I would personally rather see the medical market sorted out first, and then let's have a debate about the recreational market.
What do you think about this, Matt? Do you think it would simplify things if marijuana were legal across the board?
No, I completely agree with Mike. We need to get medical sorted, medical access. If we went down the legalisation route, yes, there are some patients that may benefit from that can't afford private prescriptions. But if we had it freely available, children like my son, they can't use recreational or go to a dispensary. So in Canada, we support and talk to parents in Canada. And they've got dispensaries on their street corner, but the cannabis from the dispensaries is just not to a standard that is suitable for their child's epilepsy. So, yeah, I completely agree. We need to get the medical situation sorted first.
And clearly, Matt, the issue with your son's access to medical use marijuana is this sort of legacy of prohibition. I mean, that's the issue. That's why there's such a grey area.
Yeah, that's something that within the cannabis sector is everyone's trying to help educate. So you've got the Medical Cannabis Clinician Society, you've got MedCan Support, several other advocacy groups, and we're all trying to educate and just remove the stigma and, you know, talk about cannabis as a medicine. That's what it is. And yeah, to push things forward.
I mean, I would imagine it's a significant cost for your family to seek private prescriptions for medical cannabis for your son.
Yes, so we're paying £650 a month. So we're now at the point that actually we can't increase his dose any longer. There are families with children that are heavier and older that require higher amounts of oil. So their prescriptions can cost anything up to £2,000. So yeah, for the families that are paying for private prescriptions, it's a huge burden. And again, this is why we keep fighting for NHS access.
The issue we have, though, Mike, when we talk about legalising cannabis across the board is it normalises the consumption of what is, in the end, a drug.
Yes, but we legalised the consumption of alcohol and look at the consequences of that. And most people are inherently sensible. When they said the pubs were going to open all day, we were told there was going to be these drunken zombies everywhere. But most people have to go to work. Most people have to do things. Most people don't spend all the time in the pub. So most people are sensible. We could do more. And I think in this context, it is removing the stigma that people find when they want to get the cannabis. So I'm involved in a wider debate. As I say, there's two options: either ruthlessly crush all drugs, or which we've tried and failed, or we do something else, which was legalise it. Canada's been mentioned, and Holland. The difference there is it's legal to possess it, but not legal to deal with it. So another ridiculous halfway house. It can't carry on. As a society, we're going to look at what we do about drugs and deal with them better.
And do you think, Professor Barnes, that ultimately medical cannabis should be available at your pharmacy without prescription?
That's a very good question. And in some of the states and in parts of Canada, what happens is the doctor approves the prescription. They check whether it's safe for you, whether you've got a condition that might benefit from it. And then you take that medical card, if you like, to a pharmacy where you talk to a properly trained pharmacist. Called bud tenders, interestingly, in parts of the states, because it's a complicated subject. There's several thousand strains of cannabis. They're all slightly different, and it's a dedicated doctor that learns all that. So what I would like to see is the medical profession screening people, if you like, make sure it's safe, make sure there's a condition for which it might be helped, and then go to a properly trained pharmacist and get the right prescription for you and your condition. That's what I'd like to see.
Mike Neville, if we were to legalise cannabis, is that not an admission that the police and the authorities have failed? And where do you draw the line? Do we legalise cocaine or heroin?
Well, the police failed to when the prohibition of alcohol. All we saw was gangsters in Chicago shooting each other. And why I think we could legalise other drugs. So you get heroin and cocaine in medical forms. If it was sold at the chemist, it wouldn't be so fashionable. And as I always say, I've just said that most people are inherently sensible. They don't take these things, and they've got to work hard. And there's tests to catch people drink driving or drug driving. The current situation just fuels crime. So houses are burgled, old ladies are mugged, people are shot and stabbed in drugs gang war. And as I mentioned before, if the drugs are controlled by anybody, they're controlled by criminals, and that's just not good enough. And it's letting the public down. We're telling lies. There is no war on drugs. People have just surrendered, and they're just letting them get on with it, to be honest.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.